What happens when the monsters you were taught to fear turn out to be more human than you are? For one man, hidden from the world for nearly 3 decades, the answer would shatter his reality, redefine his concept of honor, and prove that the most powerful weapon in any war is compassion. The jungle floor was a rotting tapestry of damp earth and decaying leaves. For 28 agonizing years, this had been his world. In the suffocating humidity of Guam, Private First Class Shoichi Yokoi was a ghost, a phantom of the Imperial Japanese Army haunting a war that had ended long ago. He crouched in the belly of the earth, in a cave he had painstakingly scraped from the hillside with nothing but a rusty bayonet. That same bayonet, now worn thin, rested in his trembling hands. He scraped its edge against a whetstone, the rhythmic rasp a grim counterpoint to the pounding of his own heart. His hands, gnarled and skeletal, were a testament to his ordeal. At 57, he looked 80, a gaunt wraith with sunken eyes, his skin stretched taut over his bones, his teeth loose from years of gnawing on frogs, rats, snails, and the bitter pulp of wild nuts. His uniform had long since surrendered to the jungle's relentless digestion, replaced by a crude tunic of woven tree bark. But it wasn't the gnawing hunger that sent a cold spike of fear through him now. It was the voices. American voices. Carefree and sharp, slicing through the thick, humid air. They were close. Too close. The sound of their language was a death knell. His mind flashed back to 1944, to Lieutenant Omi, his commanding officer, holding up the leaflets. The images were seared into his memory. Grotesque photographs of Japanese soldiers, their eyes gouged out, their bodies mutilated. "This is what the American demons do to prisoners," the lieutenant's voice had boomed, echoing with righteous fury. "Death before dishonor. Never surrender." Yokoi had believed him. Every soldier had. They had whispered the stories in the dark, tales of American Marines who collected Japanese skulls as trophies, who forced prisoners to dig their own graves before executing them. They were barbarians, savages who saw the soldiers of the Emperor as subhuman vermin. Now, after 192 days of hiding, of drinking from muddy streams and cowering at the sound of an airplane, his time had run out. The American voices were louder now, punctuated by laughter. They were hunting him. Like an animal, he felt a profound, chilling shame. Not just for being caught, but for surviving this long, for failing to die in battle, as a true soldier of Japan should have. His comrades were honored spirits at Yasukuni Shrine. He was a creature in a hole. With a final, desperate resolve, Yokoi pressed the point of the bayonet against his own stomach. The cold steel was a comfort against his feverish skin. If capture was inevitable, he would die by his own hand. He would die with his honor intact. Closing his eyes, he whispered a final, silent prayer to his mother in Aichi Prefecture. He would never see her again. He was certain of that. But what happened in the next 60 seconds would unravel everything he had ever been taught, about honor, about his enemy, and about himself. The world exploded. A blast of sunlight detonated at the mouth of his cave, searing his retinas, which had adapted to 28 years of near-total darkness. "Holy hell! There's someone in here!" The English words were meaningless, but the shock in the voice was universal. Yokoi squinted against the blinding pain, his world a white-hot blur. With a surge of adrenaline, he raised the bayonet, his trembling arms a mockery of a soldier's stance. But his malnourished body, a vessel of weakness, betrayed him. The weapon slipped from his skeletal fingers, clattering onto the stone floor with a sound of final, pathetic defeat. 2 figures blocked the entrance, their silhouettes framed by the blinding jungle light. As Yokoi's eyes slowly adjusted, he saw them. 2 American Marines. They were just boys, maybe 20 years old, their faces fresh, their uniforms impossibly clean. They seemed to radiate a light and health that felt obscene in his world of decay. Behind them, a Chamorro local, their guide, pointed a trembling finger into the cave, speaking rapidly in English. This is it, Yokoi thought, a cold resignation washing over him. This is how I die. He tried to push himself to his feet, to face his executioners like a soldier, but his legs were jelly. They buckled beneath him, and he collapsed against the damp cave wall. His brittle bark cloth tunic fell away, exposing a cage of ribs that stood out like the slats of a bamboo fence. He was naked, starving, and utterly defenseless. He tensed, waiting for the boot, the rifle butt, the final, brutal act. The taller Marine, whose name tape read Talafogo, lowered his rifle. The other, De Gracia, did the same. Jesus Christ, Talafogo whispered, his voice thick with a strange emotion. How long has this guy been out here? Yokoi understood no English, but he recognized the tone. It wasn't hatred. It was shock. Pity. They were revolted by his state, but not with the contempt he expected. Now, surely, the torture would begin. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the first blow. Instead, he felt something soft and heavy drape across his bony shoulders. His eyes shot open. The Marine, Talafogo, had taken off his own field jacket and wrapped it around Yokoi's emaciated frame. The fabric was warm, impossibly warm, carrying the heat of another living human. It smelled of soap, of tobacco, of a world Yokoi had almost forgotten. "Easy, buddy," De Gracia said, his voice low and impossibly gentle. "Easy, we're not going to hurt you." The words were alien, but the tone was a language Yokoi's terrified soul could understand. It was the sound of calm, of reassurance. Where was the snarling hatred? Where was the promised violence of the American demons? De Gracia unclipped a canteen from his belt and held it to Yokoi's cracked, bleeding lips. Water. Clean, cool water flooded his mouth, a shocking, divine sensation. For years he had drunk from stagnant pools, a green scummed liquid, thick with insects. This tasted of life itself. He tried to gulp it down, a primal thirst overriding all else. "Slow, slow," De Gracia cautioned, pulling the canteen back gently. "You'll make yourself sick." Talafogo was speaking into a radio, his voice urgent. Yokoi didn't understand the words, but the gravity was clear. This is it, he thought again, his paranoia flaring. They're calling for the interrogators, the torturers. This kindness is just a trick, a cruel prelude to the real horror. But then, De Gracia reached into his pack. He pulled out not a knife, but a chocolate bar. He unwrapped it with careful fingers, the crinkle of the foil a sound from another universe. He broke off a small piece and held it out. Yokoi stared. His mind refused to process the image. Enemy soldiers did not share their rations. They were supposed to beat him, starve him, break his spirit. "Go on," De Gracia urged, pantomiming eating. "It's okay." With a hand that shook uncontrollably, Yokoi reached for the chocolate. He placed it on his tongue. An explosion of sweetness, a ghost of a flavor he hadn't experienced since he left his home village. And then, something inside him broke. A dam of fear and loneliness and confusion that had been building for 28 years shattered. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down his hollowed-out cheeks, carving clean paths through the grime. He wept, not from pain, but from a profound, world-altering confusion. These were the monsters? These were the demons. Why were they treating him like a human being? The Marine Corps medic who arrived 20 minutes later was a man named Doc Williams, a calm-eyed African-American corpsman from Georgia who had seen more broken bodies than he cared to remember. He took one look at Yokoi's skeletal form, his gaze professional and unwavering, and immediately got to work. "This man is severely malnourished," Williams stated, his voice a low, steady rumble as he examined Yokoi's swollen joints and discolored, weeping skin. Probably beriberi, definitely parasites. He needs a hospital now. Yokoi understood none of the clinical terms, but he felt the medic's hands. They were gentle, practiced, checking his pulse, looking into his eyes with a small flashlight, pressing carefully on his distended, hardened belly. In the Imperial Japanese Army, medics treated officers first. Enlisted men, if they were lucky, waited. Enemy prisoners were not treated at all. Yet here was an American medic, a black man, spending 20 minutes meticulously examining him, bandaging the infected, open sores on his feet, and administering an injection of what he would later learn was a life-saving antibiotic. "You're going to be okay," William said, meeting Yokoi's gaze directly. "Understand? Okay." Yokoi didn't know the word, but he understood the eye contact. There was no hatred in William's eyes, no disgust. There was something else, something that baffled him even more. Compassion. They carried him out of the jungle on a stretcher. The sunlight was a physical blow, and he shielded his eyes. He expected to be thrown into the back of a truck, perhaps beaten along the way for sport. Instead, the Marine named Talafogo walked beside the stretcher, one large hand resting reassuringly on Yokoi's shoulder, talking in that same calm, steady voice. At the base hospital on Guam, Yokoi's entire worldview was systematically dismantled. They gave him a bed. Not a cage, not a concrete floor, but a real bed with crisp, clean white sheets that smelled of bleach and sunshine. This was his first true shock. He spent the next 3 weeks in that hospital, a ghost relearning how to live. His assigned nurse was a woman who should have hated him more than anyone. Lieutenant Mary Chen was a Chinese-American from San Francisco. Her family had fled the Japanese invasion of mainland China, losing everything. The stories she had grown up with were of Japanese brutality, of the rape of Nanking, of unspeakable horrors. Yet every morning, she entered his room with a gentle smile and unwavering kindness. She brought him rice porridge, slowly, patiently, reintroducing his ravaged stomach to solid foods. She changed his bandages, administered his medications, and through a combination of gestures and a shared unspoken language of care, she made him understand that he was safe. "My grandmother was in Shanghai," she told him one day, speaking softly in English as she checked his IV, knowing he couldn't understand the words but perhaps could feel their weight. "Your army, they did terrible things, but you're just a scared kid who got left behind. I can see that in your eyes." On his 4th day, the final piece of the puzzle arrived, an interpreter. He was a Nisei, a Japanese-American sergeant named George Nakamura. His own story was a paradox. While his family was confined to an internment camp in America, he had been fighting for America in Europe with the famed 442nd Regimental Combat Team. He sat by Yokoi's bed, his posture straight, his Japanese formal and polite. "Private Yokoi," Nakamura said, his voice even. "These Americans want to know if you would like to write a letter to your family, to let them know you are alive." Yokoi stared at him, his mind reeling. He was certain he had misheard. "My family?" "Yes, your mother, your siblings. The Red Cross will ensure it is delivered." "But I am a prisoner of war," Yokoi stammered, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "I am a disgrace. Why would they allow this?" Nakamura's mouth curved into a sad, knowing smile. "Because that is what the Geneva Convention requires," he said simply. "And because these men, these Marines, they believe in treating people with decency, even their enemies." With hands that still trembled, Yokoi wrote his first letter in 28 years. "Honorable Mother, I am alive. I am in American custody on Guam. I am filled with shame that I did not die for the Emperor, but the Americans have treated me with a kindness I cannot comprehend. I am receiving medical care. I am being fed. Please forgive your unworthy son for the disgrace of surviving." 3 weeks later, a reply arrived. It was a miracle. His mother was alive. She had presumed him dead since 1945, had a marker for him in the family shrine. The letter was stained with her tears of joy. She wrote not of his shame, but of her overwhelming relief. She didn't care about honor or disgrace. She just wanted her son to come home. Reading his mother's words, Yokoi broke down completely, his body racked with sobs that came from a place deeper than he knew existed. The Marine, Talafogo, who had started visiting him regularly, sat silently on the edge of the bed, placing a steady hand on his back. "Good news," he said, even without understanding. Through Nakamura's translation, Yokoi managed to choke out the words, "My mother, she still wants me. Even though I surrendered." Talafogo looked at him, his young face serious. "Of course she does," he said, his voice firm. "You're her son. The war doesn't change that." As his body healed, Yokoi's mind began to work with the sharp attention of a soldier trained to gather intelligence. He watched everything. He saw American soldiers playing baseball in the evenings, their laughter echoing in the humid air. He heard them complain about the heat, a bad meal, or a tough officer, the same grievances he had heard in his own barracks. He saw them showing each other worn, creased photographs of sweethearts and wives, their faces tender with homesickness. They were not demons. They were just men. Doc Williams, the medic, brought him a Japanese-English dictionary, and, in his off hours, would sit with him, pointing to words. "Learn this," Williams would say through Nakamura. "It will help when you go home. Japan and America, we're going to be friends after this. You'll see." Yokoi couldn't fathom it. How could mortal enemies become friends? But then Lieutenant Chen showed him a newspaper. The headline spoke of American aid flowing into a defeated Japan. Food, medicine, supplies to rebuild. General MacArthur wasn't overseeing the destruction of his homeland, but its reconstruction. The emperor hadn't been executed or humiliated. He had been allowed to remain a symbol for his people. One afternoon, a different Marine came to visit. He was young, pink-cheeked, a private named Tommy O'Brien from Boston who looked like he should still be in high school. "My dad," O'Brien began, with Nakamura translating. "He fought in France in the Great War, got captured by the Germans in 1918. He said they treated him okay, shared their bread. When this war started, he made me promise, if I ever captured anyone, I'd remember they're just somebody's kid, like me." O'Brien pulled out a worn photo of his family, a sturdy-looking father, a smiling mother, 3 younger sisters. "That's my old man," he said, pointing. "He always said the German soldier who gave him a sip of water probably saved his life. I figured maybe I could be that guy for someone." Yokoi in turn showed O'Brien the letter from his mother. For a half hour, they weren't enemies. They were just 2 young men, an ocean and a war apart, talking about their families and the food they missed from home. The most profound moment, however, came when a Marine captain named Robert Henderson arrived to take his formal statement. Henderson was older, his face lined, his eyes holding the weary weight of someone who had seen the worst of the Pacific War, Tinian, Saipan, Iwo Jima. He had lost men, good friends, to Japanese soldiers. He had every reason to despise the man sitting before him. Instead, he walked into the room and extended his hand. "Private Yokoi," Henderson said, his voice clear and strong as Nakamura translated. "I fought your army for 3 years. I lost good friends. But you survived for 28 years in a hole, eating rats, believing we would torture you to death if we found you. That, sir, takes a different kind of courage." Henderson paused, his eyes locked on Yokoi's. "You were a soldier following your orders. So was I. The war is over. Now we are just men. I respect your survival. I respect you." Yokoi was speechless. In the rigid hierarchy of the Imperial Japanese Army, an officer would never shake the hand of a lowly private. An enemy officer would never, ever express respect. "When you get home," Henderson continued, "tell people what you saw here. Tell them Americans are not demons. We are just people who believe that everyone, even a defeated enemy, deserves to be treated with dignity. That is what my country taught me." The humane treatment Yokoi received wasn't an isolated accident. It was a matter of deliberate strategic policy. It was a philosophy rooted in both American cultural values and cold, hard military doctrine. Dating back to the nation's founding, the American military had, with notable and tragic exceptions, strived to adhere to the established laws of war. By World War II, the 1929 Geneva Convention was the standard. Its rules were clear: adequate food, medical care, shelter, the right to correspond with family, and protection from violence. But for American leadership, it was more than a rulebook, it was a strategy. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, had issued unequivocal directives: prisoners of war will be treated with humanity. He believed it encouraged enemy soldiers to surrender, saving countless American lives and laying the groundwork for a stable post-war world. In the Pacific, where the fighting was uniquely brutal and surrender was rare, General Douglas MacArthur echoed this philosophy. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, went even further, testifying that even the crews of Japanese submarines who had committed atrocities should receive fair treatment as POWs. "We must be better than our enemies," Nimitz stated. "That is what separates civilization from barbarism." This wasn't universally applied. The Pacific War was brutal, and war crimes occurred on the American side. Traumatized soldiers, enraged by Japanese atrocities, sometimes killed prisoners. But this was not policy. It was a violation of policy, and when discovered, it was prosecuted. As Talafogo, the Marine who found him, explained one evening through Nakamura, "Some of our guys are angry. They lost buddies to banzai charges, to kamikazes. I get it, but the old man, the captain, he says revenge is a fool's game. He says we're fighting to prove we're better than that." Yokoi began to keep a diary on scraps of paper, with Nakamura helping him write. His entries trace a seismic shift in his soul. Cold Day 9, the nurse, Chen. "She is Chinese. Our army brought ruin to her people. Yet she tends my wounds as if I were her own brother. I do not understand this." Day 15. The Marine, Talafogo, brought me American cigarettes. We smoked together. He showed me a photo of his sweetheart. He wants to open a restaurant. He asked what I want to do. I had no answer. I never planned to have a future. Day 21. Mother's letter. I wept like a baby. Sergeant Nakamura told me his own family is in a camp, imprisoned by the same country he fights for. He said, "Hate is a prison, Yokoi-san. Mercy is the key." I am beginning to believe him. In June 1972, after months of recovery, Shoichi Yokoi boarded a transport ship bound for Japan. Talafogo, De Gracia, and several other Marines came to the dock to see him off. "Remember what you saw here," Talafogo said, his voice earnest. "Tell your people. We don't have to be enemies." Yokoi, who had been practicing with his dictionary, bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect. "I will tell them," he said in slow, halting English. "I will tell. Americans have honor." Talafogo laughed, a big, open sound, and pulled the smaller man into a rough, American-style hug. "Take care of yourself, buddy. Say hello to your mother for me." When the ship docked in Yokohama, Yokoi saw his mother on the pier. She was smaller than he remembered, frail, aged by years of grief. When her eyes found his, she saw not a ghost, but her son. She collapsed, and he rushed to catch her. They wept together on the crowded dock, a private island in a sea of homecoming. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. "I thought I had lost you." "The Americans saved me, Mother," Yokoi told her, his voice thick with an emotion he still couldn't name. "I don't understand why, but they saved me." He struggled to reintegrate. Post-war Japan was a nation of ghosts, its cities in ruins, its people starving. But American aid was everywhere. GHQ, MacArthur's occupation authority, was focused on rebuilding, not retribution. In time, Yokoi married and had children. He rarely spoke of the war, but when he did, it was always about the men who found him. "They could have shot me," he told his son years later. "I was their enemy, but they gave me chocolate instead of a bullet. They gave me kindness instead of hatred. That is true strength." In 1975, he wrote to the U.S. Marine Corps, asking for help to find the men who had spared his life. They found them. Jesus Talafogo was living in his home village on Guam. Manuel de Gracia was in Illinois. The men exchanged letters. In 1977, 30 years after he had been carried out of the jungle, Shoichi Yokoi flew to Guam. At the airport, he and Talafogo embraced, two old men, no longer soldiers, their shared past a strange and powerful bond. "You changed my life," Yokoi told Talafogo, his English now more confident. "You showed me that enemies can become friends, that mercy is stronger than revenge." Talafogo, a man of few words, simply shrugged. "I just treated you like a person, that's all." "That," Yokoi replied, his voice thick with emotion, "is everything." Yokoi's story is a microcosm of a larger, profound truth. The American decision to treat its defeated enemies with dignity paid astonishing strategic dividends. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Western Europe, turning a bitter foe, Germany, into a cornerstone of NATO. In Asia, a devastated Japan became America's most critical ally. This was not inevitable. After World War I, the punitive Treaty of Versailles fueled a resentment in Germany that gave rise to Nazism. After World War II, America, led by visionaries like George C. Marshall, chose a different path. When Yokoi died in 1997, his family found a box of letters and Christmas cards from Talafogo and de Gracia, spanning decades. In his final letter, Talafogo wrote, "Shoichi, you always thanked us for treating you like a human being. But I should thank you. You reminded us why we fought. Not to destroy, but to prove that decency and honor matter, even in the darkest of times. You are my friend, buddy. Always will be." Shoichi Yokoi went into a cave expecting to meet demons. Instead, he met men. He expected torture and was given chocolate. That single, simple act of humanity began the process of dismantling a lifetime of propaganda. It was not an anomaly. It was a strategy. It was a choice that reminds us that while politics and hatred can make us enemies, a shared humanity, if we are brave enough to see it, can make us brothers.
Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts, like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe for more.